In this video, we want to continue with our trig equations. We're just going to look at a few more types of equations and ways to solve equations. So first, let's consider this equation. The sine of 3x equals the square root of 3 over 2. Now, first let's graph sine of 3x. What the 3 does is it changes my period to 2 pi over 3. So if I graph this, sine starts at 0, ends at 2 pi over 3, here it's in the middle, here it's there, so my graph looks like that. Now, if I continue this, it continues on and continues on. So you can see what I get is just between 0 to 2 pi. So if I'm still solving it, let's even go degrees. Even if I go 0 to 360, you can see I now have a whole bunch of these sine curves. And if I want to look at square root of 3 over 2, which is like 0.87, which is right here, you can see I don't have two answers. I now have 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So how can I find all 6 answers? I have 3 times as many because of that 3. So let's look at how we could do that. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to solve sine of x is square root of 3 over 2. That's first. And sine of square root of 3 over 2, I want to use degrees here, is 60 and 120. So your first step is to solve it like we did before in the last homework. And then I say, well, 3x equals my answers. So 3x is 60 and 3x is 120. But I have to add my 360 plus n plus my 360n. Now I divide by 3. So I divide both of them by 3. That is 20 plus 160 divided by 3 is 120n. Over here, divide by 3, I get 40 plus 120n. Now I write down my answers. Let's start with the first one. When n is 0, I get 20. When n is 1, 120 plus 20 is 140. When n is 2, I get 240 plus 20 is 260. Now, I only get 3 answers from each part because there's 3. And you can see why. If I put 3 in there, I'd get 360 plus 20. That's bigger than 360, so I stop. Go to the other one. When n is 0, I get 40. When n is 1, I get 60. When n is 2, I get 280. So there are my 6 answers. Let's try another one. Sine of 2x is square root of 2 over 2. So first, let's solve cosine of x, negative square root of 2 over 2. And since it's negative, I get 135, 225. So I get 2x equals 135 plus 360n, and 2x equals 225 plus 360n. So my x is 135, and I can't divide by 2, so it's odd, so I'm just going to write this as one big fraction all over 2. and x equals 225 plus 360 and all over 2. Now I'm going to use a calculator in this case, and I'm going to say when n is 0, I get 135 divided by 2, 67.5. When n is 1, 365 plus 135 divided by 2, I get 247.5. Now if n was 3, I would get a number bigger than 360, so I stop. Since there's a 2 here, I only get 2 from each of these x's. Now when n is 0 over here, 225 divided by 2, I get 112.5. And then when n is 1, I get 292.5 for my answers. So there are my 4 answers. How do I know I'd have 4? Well, normally cosine is equal to square root of 2 over 2 twice, but because there's a 2 here, I got to multiply my number of answers times 2. Back here, there's a 3 here, so I multiplied by 3, so I got 6. So those are the first types of problems. When you have some number in front of the x, which changes your period, so you get more answers. The other kind of problems, we're going to have to use a little factoring. I have 2 cosine squared minus cosine. So what I have to do is factor out a cosine, and I get 2 cosine minus 1 equals 0. Now I can split that into 2 problems. Cosine of x equals 0, and 2 cosine x minus 1 equals 0. Now, each of these problems, I am just going to treat like we did in the last homework. Cosine is 1/2, is going to happen, or cosine is 0. That happens at pi over 2. I'm in radians. 3 pi over 2. And then cosine equals 1/2. That is at pi over 3 and 5 pi over 3. So you have to factor and split it up, set equal to 0 because of product, 0 product property, just like we solve all the others we factor, and then solve each of them separately. And then each part has its own answers. Here, same thing. We got a factor. But now this is going to be secant of x, secant of x. 2 numbers that multiply to give you 2, add to give you -1. This equals 0. So now I have secant of x plus 1 is 0. Secant of x minus 2 is 0. And now we solve these just like the last chapter. Secant of x equals a -1. Secant of x equals 2. You flip both sides to convert it to cosine. And you do that. Now, on both of these, you may be able to help yourself by doing this. Think of this as 2x minus x is 0. Excuse me, 2x squared. You factor out the x, and you get 2x minus 1. This x is just our cosine. Here we have x squared minus x minus 2. This factors into x plus 1, x minus 2. And here our x is secant. So you can kind of think of that trig function as an x and maybe rewrite it. That might help you visualize it to go back to our quadratics and factoring. We haven't forgotten all that we've done before with quadratics and factoring. It's now coming back with our trig functions. Quadratics, factoring, and logarithms. Bring that back in to see what we remember. Logarithms. Log base 2 of secant of x equals -1/2. Remember, from logarithmic form to exponential form, Now remember, 2 to the negative 1/2 is going to be 1 over the square root of 2. This is going to be sine when we flip it. And if you rationalize the denominator, this would be square root of 2 over 2 once you simplify. Okay. So, however these are, whether those are logarithms, you got to write it into this form, or whether it's factoring, you got to write it into the form. That is our next step. That is homework number 2.